6 weeks had passed since her world shattered. Every moment since had been a blur of sleepless nights, tearful mornings, and endless searching. Emily had been told, repeatedly, that there was no hope. The police had stopped looking. The social workers had written off her case, insisting that her twins had simply disappeared without a trace, as if they were lost forever in the vastness of the city. Yet, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, holding the key to her missing children. She had spent every day retracing her steps, thinking back to every detail before the unthinkable had happened. It was a typical morning when she took her twins to the park, a moment that now felt like a lifetime ago. She had turned her back for only a few minutes, enough time for them to slip away. It was only then that she realized they were gone, as if the earth had swallowed them whole. But now, after 6 weeks, her heart had grown heavy with the weight of uncertainty. With no new leads, no fresh information, she felt the hope that had once burned bright begin to fade. In the quiet corners of her mind, she heard the whispers of doubt. What if they were gone forever? What if she was never going to hold them again? Then, just when she had nearly given up, a voice spoke that stopped her dead in her tracks. It came from a homeless woman, sitting alone on the sidewalk, hunched over in the shade of an alleyway. Emily, as usual, had been walking, her feet dragging with exhaustion, her thoughts preoccupied with the heavy weight of worry and despair. She hadn't noticed the woman at first, but when she heard the voice, it was as if time itself had slowed. The homeless woman's voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with an unsettling certainty. "You should check the KFC bathroom," the woman said. "That's where they're keeping them." Emily froze. Her first instinct was to dismiss the woman's words as just another rambling from someone who had no grip on reality. But there was something about her tone, something in the way she spoke, that sent a chill down Emily's spine. It wasn't just an offhand comment. It was a statement. The kind of statement someone makes when they know more than they're letting on. For a moment, Emily didn't know what to think. The KFC bathroom? It didn't make any sense. Why would her children be there? But then, with a sudden burst of adrenaline, Emily's hope flared again. It wasn't much to go on, but it was the first lead she'd gotten in weeks. She had to follow it. But there was something else that tugged at her as she began to move. The homeless woman's eyes. They weren't just empty, hollow eyes that you'd expect from someone living on the streets. There was something in them, something that spoke of a past, of a knowing, something deep and hidden beneath the surface. Emily found herself glancing back as she walked away, the woman's words echoing in her mind. With determination pushing her forward, Emily made her way to the KFC, the familiar red and white logo standing like a beacon in the distance. As she entered the restaurant, the smells of fried chicken and mashed potatoes filled the air, the bustle of the lunchtime crowd bustling around her. It all felt so normal, so ordinary. But for Emily, everything had changed. She didn't waste any time. Without pausing to order food or even glance at the menu, she made a beeline for the restroom, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what she was going to find or if she would find anything at all, but she couldn't ignore the small thread of hope that had lodged itself in her chest. The bathroom was quiet when she pushed open the door, the flickering fluorescent lights overhead casting a dull glow across the tiled walls. She stood still for a moment, listening, her breath quickening. Nothing. The restroom was empty. It was just a regular, public bathroom, nothing out of the ordinary. But as her eyes scanned the room, something caught her attention. In the far corner, just beyond the row of stalls, was a small, crumpled piece of paper lying on the floor. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. Her hands shook as she crouched down, picking it up carefully. It was a note handwritten in hurried, uneven handwriting. Emily unfolded it with trembling fingers, the words inside making her heart stop. "Your twins are safe. But you must act fast. The people who took them are watching. They won't let you get close again." The note was like a slap in the face, both a lifeline and a warning. Her mind raced with questions. Who had left this note? How did they know about her children? And why would they warn her? Was this some cruel joke, or was this her final chance? Emily stood up, holding the note close to her chest, her breath coming in ragged bursts. She had so many questions, but no answers. She didn't know who to trust. She didn't know who was watching. But what she did know was that the clock was ticking. She had been given a lead, a very real lead, but she had no idea what the next step was. But then, just as quickly as the note appeared, a new figure entered the scene. A black teen, who was sitting quietly at a table near the back of the restaurant, seemed to take notice of Emily's frantic demeanor. He was watching her, but not in the way most people would. It was as if he knew something she didn't. As if he understood the weight of what she was holding in her hands. He stood up and walked toward her, his gaze steady but kind. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm yet filled with a certain urgency. Emily didn't know what to say. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, she just stared at him, the note still clutched tightly in her hands. There was something about him, a sense of quiet wisdom in his eyes that made her feel like he might know more than he was letting on. Without a word, the teen reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. "I think I can help you," he said softly, his voice filled with a strange certainty. "But you need to trust me." Emily's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know this boy. She had no reason to trust him. But there was something in the way he spoke, something in the way he looked at her, that made her wonder if fate had led her here, to this very moment. The words of the homeless woman echoed in her mind, and Emily's instincts kicked in. She didn't have time to question. She needed answers, and this boy seemed to hold the key to what had been going on all along. "Why should I trust you?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. The teen smiled gently, a flicker of something mysterious crossing his face. "Because sometimes, a small act of kindness can change everything." Before Emily could respond, the boy handed her a small piece of paper, folded neatly in his hand. As she opened it, her eyes widened in shock at what she saw, another note, this time with a set of instructions, leading her to her next destination. But what lay ahead was even more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. And just like that, the web of mystery deepened, leaving Emily standing at a crossroads with no way of knowing what would come next. Would the boy be her ally, or was he leading her into even greater danger? Was this just the beginning of her search, or had she finally uncovered a secret that would change everything? Emily stood frozen for a moment, staring at the folded note in her hands. The boy's gaze was steady, as if he were waiting for her to make a decision. Her heart raced, uncertainty flooding her thoughts. Who was this teenager, and why was he so sure that he could help her? Her instincts screamed that she couldn't trust him, not entirely. But then again, what choice did she have? She had followed every lead, and each one had turned out to be a dead end. The boy's presence was strange, almost surreal. He had no reason to help her, yet here he was, offering a clue when everything seemed hopeless. Was he part of something bigger? Was he connected to the people who had taken her twins? Or was he just a stranger trying to help, someone who had stumbled into her nightmare by accident? She unfolded the note carefully, as if it might vanish if she touched it too roughly. It was short, cryptic, and unsettling. The words were scrawled in a rushed handwriting, the ink slightly smeared in places. "Go to the old warehouse on 5th, 8 p.m. Bring no one. Don't trust anyone." It was direct, and yet there was something about it that sent a chill down Emily's spine. She glanced back at the boy, his expression unreadable. "What's this?" she asked, her voice shaky. The boy nodded, his eyes locking with hers. "You need to go there. Trust me, this is the only real lead you've got. You won't find anything else, not like this." Emily felt a wave of conflicting emotions, hope, fear, confusion. She had been searching for weeks, each day blending into the next, and now, after hearing the woman's warning and this boy's advice, she was closer to finding her children than ever before. Yet the fear lingered, deep and gnawing, like a shadow she couldn't shake. The note's warning about trusting no one echoed in her mind. "What if this is a trap?" Emily asked, looking at the boy as if searching for some hint of sincerity in his eyes. "What if you're just using me to get something?" The boy's gaze softened, but his expression remained firm. "I'm not using you, and I'm not here to hurt you. But this is dangerous. You'll need to be careful, and you can't bring anyone with you. If you want to find your kids, you'll have to trust me." She felt a flicker of doubt. She had heard similar promises before, people who claimed to know things, people who made false promises of help, only to deceive her further. But this boy seemed different. He didn't have the look of someone who was playing a game. There was something raw, something earnest about him that made her question her instinct to reject him. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "I don't even know your name." The boy hesitated for a moment before responding, his tone softer than before. "I've seen what happens when people get lost. When they get caught up in things they don't understand. I know what it's like to feel like the world is closing in on you. I've been where you are." Emily raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" The boy didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around the restaurant as if checking to make sure no one was listening. When his gaze returned to Emily, there was something darker in his eyes. "I'm not who I seem to be," he said slowly, his voice low. "But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you get to your children before it's too late." Emily wasn't sure what to make of his words. He seemed genuine, but there was a weight to them that hinted at something more complicated. She couldn't deny that his offer of help was tempting, but the danger was palpable, like a thick fog pressing in on her every decision. "Okay," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. "I'll go. But if this turns out to be another dead end, I'm done." The boy nodded, as if he had expected no less. "I'll be here when you get back. Just be careful, all right? If anything feels off, don't go inside. Trust your gut." Emily didn't know why, but his words brought her some comfort. There was something about him, an unspoken sincerity, that made her feel like she could take this step. Maybe this was the break she'd been waiting for. Maybe this was the moment that would finally bring her children back. As she stepped out of the KFC and into the cool evening air, Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what awaited her at the warehouse, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The streets felt emptier now, the city's noise muffled by the intensity of her thoughts. The note still clutched tightly in her hand, she walked quickly, her footsteps echoing in the quiet evening. The warehouse on 5th Street wasn't far, but it felt like an eternity as she made her way there. The weight of the note pressed heavily in her pocket, a constant reminder of the uncertainty she faced. She tried to keep her thoughts focused, but they kept drifting back to her twins, to the memories of their laughter and their innocent faces before everything fell apart. When she finally reached the warehouse, the building loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. It looked abandoned, the windows boarded up, the door hanging slightly ajar. Emily hesitated, her breath caught in her throat. This was it. The moment that could bring everything to an end or change her life forever. She checked the time on her phone, 8:02 p.m. The note had been clear. She needed to be here on time. She couldn't afford to wait any longer. She pushed open the door cautiously, stepping into the dimly lit interior. Inside, it was eerily quiet. The air smelled of dust and disuse, but there was a sense of something more, something hidden, waiting just beyond her reach. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe the boy had been right. Maybe this was her chance to find her children. But then, the silence was broken by a sound, a rustling from the far corner of the room. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving slowly, deliberately. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she tried to make out the person's face. She couldn't see clearly, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just anyone. This was someone who knew her, who knew exactly what she was here for. The question now was, who were they, and what did they want? The tension in the air was thick, and as the figure stepped forward into the dim light, Emily's pulse quickened. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain, the answers she sought were just within her grasp, and yet, the unknown loomed just ahead, ready to reveal itself in ways she never could have anticipated. Emily's heart raced as the figure in the shadows moved closer, each step echoing in the cavernous space. The dim light revealed only a silhouette, too obscured for her to make out any clear features, but there was something unmistakable about the way the person walked, purposeful, steady. Her breath caught as she stood frozen, waiting for the figure to speak or make any gesture that might offer some clarity. "Who's there?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her body tensed, preparing for whatever came next. Was this part of the trap? Could this person really have information about her twins? The figure didn't respond immediately. The seconds stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. Emily's eyes scanned the room again, searching for something that might offer her some kind of reassurance. The musty smell of the warehouse, the faint rustling of something in the distance, it all felt wrong, like the world was closing in on her. She took another cautious step forward, her senses alert. Then, the figure spoke. The voice was low and smooth, but there was an edge to it that sent a chill running down Emily's spine. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Emily's stomach dropped. She had not expected this. Whoever this was, they were expecting her. They had been waiting for her. The realization hit her with the force of a cold wave. This was no random encounter. There was a plan in motion here, a plan that she was only beginning to understand. The figure stepped into the light, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was a woman, dressed in a long, dark coat that seemed to blend in with the shadows around her. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her face sharp and unreadable. But there was something about her eyes, a cold intensity that felt like it pierced right through Emily. "Who are you?" Emily demanded, trying to steady her voice. She had no idea who this person was, but it didn't matter. She needed answers. The woman gave a small, knowing smile, as if she were savoring a moment of power. "I'm someone who knows exactly what you're looking for," she said, her tone both calm and unnerving. The words hung in the air like a threat, yet Emily couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. Could this woman really know something about her missing children? Was she the person who could finally answer the questions that had tormented Emily for weeks? Emily took another step forward, her voice shaking. "Tell me what you know about my twins. Where are they?" The woman's smile faltered for just a moment, a brief flicker of something hidden in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She tilted her head, sizing Emily up. "You really don't know, do you?" "Don't know what?" Emily's pulse quickened. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stepped back and gestured for Emily to follow her into the depths of the warehouse. "Come with me," she said. "I'll show you everything you need to know. But you might not like it." Every instinct screamed at Emily to run, to flee from this place, from this woman, and whatever game she was playing. But she couldn't. Not now. She was so close. Slowly, Emily followed the woman into the dark recesses of the building. The further they went, the colder the air seemed to grow, the shadows thicker, more suffocating. Each creak of the floor beneath their feet sounded louder, like a warning. The deeper they went into the warehouse, the more disoriented Emily became. She was no longer sure where she was going or what she was stepping into, but she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The woman finally stopped in front of an old door that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. She turned, her face unreadable. "You might want to brace yourself," she said, her voice quiet but heavy with implication. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. She had no idea what to expect beyond that door, but she was already too far in. There was no turning back now. She needed to know the truth, even if it shattered everything she thought she knew. The woman reached for the door handle and slowly pushed it open. The hinges groaned in protest, the sound echoing through the silence. Inside the room was even darker than the rest of the warehouse, but Emily could just make out the faintest outlines of things, objects stacked haphazardly, large crates and boxes that seemed to go on forever. There was a strange stillness to the air, like the room had been frozen in time. She stepped inside, and the woman followed her. The air felt heavy with anticipation as Emily's eyes adjusted to the dim light. "I know what you're looking for," the woman said again, her voice so calm it sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "But I don't think you'll like what you find." The words were like a hammer to Emily's chest, and for a moment, she could barely breathe. What was this woman trying to tell her? Why did everything about this situation feel like it was spiraling into something she wasn't prepared for? As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Emily finally saw what was in front of her. The room was filled with old photographs, pinned to the walls in chaotic clusters. Some of the pictures were faded with age, others seemed newer, but all of them had one thing in common. They all showed children. Children that Emily didn't recognize, but who seemed strangely familiar. She moved closer to the wall, her fingers trembling as she traced the edges of one photograph. There, in the corner, was a small face she knew all too well, one of her twins. The photo had been taken months ago, but it was unmistakably them. And that was when the woman's voice cut through the silence again. "You're not the only one looking for them." The words hung in the air like a bombshell, and Emily's stomach twisted with dread. What did that mean? Who else was involved in this? And why was her child's photo here, in this place, with all these other children? She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in on her, suffocating her with the weight of the revelation. Every answer she had been hoping for seemed to create even more questions. "I didn't want you to find this," the woman continued, her voice low and almost regretful. "But you have no choice now. You've been brought into something much bigger than you could ever understand." Emily's mind was spinning, her thoughts a jumbled mess. She wanted to scream, to demand more answers, but all she could do was stare at the photographs, her heart sinking with the awful realization that whatever this was, it wasn't over yet. The room felt colder now, the air heavier. Emily's hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white. She couldn't let this go. Not now. Not when she was so close to the truth. But the questions kept piling up, and with each passing second, it became clearer that she had just stumbled into a much darker mystery than she had ever imagined. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she stood there, her eyes fixed on the photographs of her twins, mixed in with other children's faces. The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if it were alive with secrets that had been buried for too long. She could barely focus, the questions whirling around her mind faster than she could catch them. Who had taken these pictures? And why were they all here? The woman's words echoed in Emily's head. "You're not the only one looking for them." Her breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of the cryptic statement. Who else was searching for her children? What could possibly be so important about her twins that others were hunting them too? A deep sense of unease settled in Emily's stomach, but she forced herself to step closer to the wall of photos, her fingers brushing over them. She picked up a photo of her son, his face bright with a smile she hadn't seen in weeks, before they vanished. She clenched her fist around the edges of the picture, the weight of the moment hitting her like a wave. Each photo felt like a piece of the puzzle, yet there were so many gaps, so many things that didn't add up. A low creak sounded behind her, and Emily spun around. The woman was no longer standing where she had been moments ago. Instead, she had taken a few steps back, her face unreadable, a quiet tension in her posture. "You're asking the right questions," she said, her voice calm, but there was something in her tone that made Emily feel as if the ground was slowly shifting beneath her feet. "But you're not ready for the answers." "Not yet." Emily's pulse quickened. The woman's cryptic words made her feel like she was caught in a tangled web, each thread pulling her deeper into something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. She wanted to scream, demand answers, but all she could manage was a shaky breath. "What do you mean I'm not ready? I need to know where my children are. They're missing, how could you even say that?" The woman's eyes softened, but there was no compassion in them, only a cold, calculating resolve. "There are forces at play here that you can't begin to understand. You've stumbled into something much bigger than yourself. And there are people who will stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden." Emily's stomach churned with a mixture of fear and determination. The woman's words were chilling, but they only fueled her need to keep pushing, to uncover whatever it was she was being kept in the dark about. She couldn't, no, she wouldn't let her children be lost forever. Before she could speak again, the woman moved to the far side of the room, her silhouette just barely visible in the dim light. "There's someone who can help you," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "But you have to understand, once you reach out to them, there's no going back. You can't undo what you find. You're in too deep now." Emily's mind raced, her heart thundering in her chest. A part of her wanted to turn around, to walk out of that room and forget everything, but another part of her, the part that was a mother, desperate and unyielding, refused to leave without knowing what happened to her children. "Who is it?" she demanded. "Who can help me?" The woman hesitated for a moment, the air thick with the unspoken weight of her decision. Then, slowly, she reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. She held it out to Emily, her hand trembling ever so slightly. Emily reached for it with shaking hands, her fingers grazing the paper before taking it fully. She opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the address scribbled on the page. It was a place she didn't recognize, but the fact that the woman had given it to her made her think it was important. "This is where you need to go," the woman said quietly. "But you have to go alone. Trust no one. Not even me." Emily looked up, her confusion deepening. "Why? Why would I trust you if you're telling me not to?" The woman's expression hardened. "Because right now, you don't have a choice." For a moment, there was only silence between them, the tension thick and suffocating. Emily wanted to ask so many more questions, but she knew that whatever answers this woman had were still too far out of reach. With a deep breath, Emily folded the paper in her hand and stuffed it into her pocket. She didn't have time to waste. Every second counted. Her children were out there, somewhere. And if this was the key to finding them, she couldn't afford to hesitate. As she turned to leave the room, she glanced back at the woman, still standing in the shadows. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The woman's face was hard to read, but her eyes flickered with something, maybe regret, maybe something darker. "Now, you go," she said simply. "And you pray that you're not too late." Emily nodded, the weight of the woman's words settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. There was no more time for hesitation, no more time to doubt. She had to move forward. She had to get to that address, no matter what it took. The door creaked shut behind her as she stepped into the dim hallway, the echo of her footsteps the only sound in the quiet building. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to find another way, but she couldn't. The need to find her children was too strong, too urgent. With each step, she felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on her, the tangled threads of her search leading her toward an unknown, dangerous truth. The woman's warning echoed in her mind. She was already in too deep. And she didn't know if she could ever get out. As Emily moved through the building, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that there were eyes on her from the shadows. The air felt thick with unseen danger, the walls closing in around her. Was she really ready for what lay ahead? Was she prepared to face the truth, no matter how horrifying it might be? She didn't know. But she had no choice. She had to find her children. And the next step, the next move, would decide everything. As Emily stepped out into the darkened streets, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on her chest. She could still feel the cold air from the building's interior clinging to her skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill creeping into her bones. She had the address in her pocket, but now, something wasn't right. The air felt different, charged, electric, as if the world around her was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing in the silent night, but the sense of urgency that had propelled her forward suddenly began to feel more like a trap. Every shadow seemed to stretch just a little too long. Every alley she passed seemed to hold something lurking just beyond her sight. It was as if she were being pulled into a web that was spinning faster and faster, each thread tangling her deeper in its grasp. Suddenly, Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out with trembling hands, and her heart skipped a beat when she saw the caller ID. It was a blocked number. Hesitant, she answered. "Hello." Her voice was sharp, edged with fear, but it trembled just slightly, betraying the panic rising within her. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a voice that sent a cold shiver down her spine. It was a man's voice, low and unmistakably familiar, but it was distorted, as if he were speaking through a voice modulator. "Emily, I see you're following the clues. But you don't know what you're walking into." The voice was calm, eerily so, but the words themselves were enough to make Emily's stomach twist in a knot. She froze in place, the phone pressed tightly to her ear. "Who is this?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper, her thoughts spiraling. Could this be someone who knew what had happened to her children? Or worse, someone connected to their disappearance? "You don't recognize my voice. It's funny how people forget. I've been in the shadows this whole time, just watching, waiting." The man's voice sent a wave of dread over her. "You've been asking the right questions, but the answers are not what you think." Emily's mind raced. Was this another person connected to the woman from earlier? Was this someone who knew where her children were? She clenched her fist around the phone, trying to steady her breath. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice strong. The voice chuckled darkly, and for a brief moment, Emily thought she could hear something else in the background, something faint, like the sound of rustling papers or shifting in the dark. "Oh, I don't want anything from you, Emily. But you have no idea how deep this goes. You think you're searching for your children, but there's something far bigger at play here. It's not just about them. It never was." Her pulse quickened. Her children weren't just missing, they were part of something much larger. The thought made her head spin, but she couldn't afford to get lost in the confusion. She needed answers. "Where are my children?" she asked again, desperation creeping into her voice. The line went quiet for a long moment, and when the voice finally spoke again, it was laced with a strange mixture of amusement and warning. "You're closer than you think, but don't get too excited, Emily. You might not like what you find." Before Emily could respond, the call was abruptly ended. The silence that followed felt deafening, and her breath caught in her throat. Something about the conversation felt wrong. This wasn't just a person trying to lead her astray. This was someone who had been tracking her, someone who knew too much. She looked around the street, her senses heightened, as if she were being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Her eyes scanned the shadows, and for the briefest second, she thought she saw movement, a figure, just at the edge of her vision, disappearing behind a building. Without thinking, she began walking faster, her mind racing. The man's words had left her with more questions than answers. What was he talking about when he said there was something bigger at play? What did he mean by, "It's not just about them"? And who else was involved in this? As she approached the street corner, her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts. She stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest, when she saw a new message notification. It was from an unknown number, and the text was short but chilling: "Don't go to the address. It's a trap." The words blurred in her vision as a wave of disbelief washed over her. Who could have sent this? Was it the same person from the call, trying to warn her, or was it someone else entirely, someone trying to manipulate her? And why were they trying to stop her from going there? Her hands trembled as she looked back at the crumpled paper in her pocket, the address she had been told to go to now feeling like a death sentence. Every part of her screamed to turn around, to go back and ignore everything that had happened, but she couldn't. Not when she was so close. Not when she was this close to uncovering the truth. With a deep breath, Emily tucked her phone back into her pocket and took the first step toward the unknown, her mind swirling with questions, her instincts screaming at her to be cautious. She had to keep moving forward, but now, every corner she turned felt like a risk. Every step seemed to bring her closer to a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. As she walked toward the address, the sense of dread only grew stronger. This wasn't just about finding her children anymore. Something much darker, more sinister, was unfolding, and Emily was already too deep to back out now. The darkness surrounding her felt almost suffocating, like a storm building just above her, and she had no idea if she was about to be struck by it. With each step, the tension in the air grew, and Emily's mind raced, desperate for answers, but terrified of what she might uncover. She reached the corner, and her breath caught in her throat. There, just ahead, the building she was looking for came into view, a nondescript warehouse, dark and silent. It looked so ordinary, so out of place in the dim light of the street, yet everything inside her screamed that it wasn't. She wasn't sure what to expect, but the feeling of being watched had only intensified. And whatever was waiting inside that warehouse, whatever truth was hidden there, she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But she was here, and there was no turning back.